Every Friday morning, Arthur Bradley laced up his worn-out running shoes and hit the quiet streets of Charleston, South Carolina. At 60, Arthur prided himself on staying active. His life had been one of discipline, having served in various high-ranking legal positions. Yet few in this town knew the extent of his accomplishments. To the locals, he was just Mr. Bradley, the friendly old man who waved to neighbors during his morning jogs. This particular Friday started like any other. The street was quiet, and Arthur enjoyed the serenity that the early hours offered. As he jogged past the edge of Riverside Park, a faint cry for help broke the morning stillness. Arthur slowed, his eyes scanning for the source. That's when he saw her, a frail, elderly white woman struggling with two masked thugs who were trying to snatch her handbag. Without hesitation, Arthur sprinted toward the scene. "Hey! Let her go!" he shouted. The two men glanced at him, frightened, before shoving the woman to the ground and taking off. Despite his age, Arthur gave chase, but his legs, no longer those of a young man, couldn't keep up. He returned to the woman, who was sitting on the ground, shaken but unharmed. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Arthur asked, helping her to her feet. "Yes, thank you," she stammered, brushing dirt from her coat. As they stood there, the sound of screeching tires interrupted them. A police cruiser pulled up, and Officer Greg Harper, a burly man in his 40s, stepped out. His sharp gaze darted between the woman and Arthur, landing suspiciously on Arthur. "What's going on here?" the officer barked. The woman opened her mouth to explain, but before she could get a word out, Harper's eyes narrowed on Arthur. "Sir, step back. Hands where I can see them." Arthur frowned. "Officer, I was just—" "Save it," Harper interrupted, pulling out his handcuffs. "You think you can rob an old lady in broad daylight and get away with it?" The woman shook her head vigorously. No, you don't understand. This man saved me." But Harper wasn't listening. His focus was fixed on Arthur, his assumptions clouded by bias. "Lady, stay out of this," he said, stepping closer to Arthur. "I've seen this before. Playing the hero to cover your tracks, huh?" Arthur tried to stay calm. He replied, "Officer, I think you're misunderstanding." "Shut it," Harper snapped. "I'm not here to debate with you." Arthur was surprised by why the police officer was behaving in such a manner. This wasn't his first encounter with prejudice, but he hadn't expected it in such an absurd situation. Harper took another step forward, his hand inching toward his gun. "Whoa, there's no need for that," Arthur said, raising his hands slightly. But Harper's temper was flaring. "I'll decide what's necessary," he spat, pulling out his sidearm and pointing it at Arthur. The woman screamed. "What are you doing? Stop this madness!" Arthur stood frozen. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly. "Officer, let me show you something," he said. "Don't move!" Harper barked. Ignoring the warning, Arthur calmly pulled out a badge and held it up. "I'm Arthur Bradley, United States Attorney General." Harper froze immediately with a pale face. The realization hit him like a freight train. Arthur's calm yet authoritative tone pierced the tension. "Now," Arthur said, lowering his hand, "shall we discuss this properly?" Harper stammered, "Sir, I didn't know." The elderly woman crossed her arms. "Now you've done it," she muttered, glaring at Harper. The cop's expression teetered between shock and fear, his face pale as he pieced together the gravity of his mistake. The old woman, still trembling from the incident, stepped closer with a sharper voice now. "I told you he wasn't the criminal," she said, her eyes blazing with fury. "He saved me, and you almost shot him." Arthur placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, it's all right," he said gently. Then, turning his attention back to Harper. "Officer, lower your weapon." "Now," he commanded. Harper obeyed instantly, fumbling as he holstered the gun. I didn't know who you were, sir. You have to understand." Arthur raised a hand to silence him. "Your job is to serve and protect, not to act on your biases. You pointed a gun at an innocent man based on nothing but assumptions. Do you realize how dangerous that is?" The officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a child caught red-handed in the act of wrongdoing. "I made a mistake," Harper finally muttered, his eyes downcast. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "A mistake?" he repeated. "You almost escalated a situation that didn't require force. What if I hadn't been who I am? What if this were someone without a badge to defend himself?" Harper shuffled uncomfortably, while the woman nodded vigorously in agreement. "We need to report this," the woman said firmly. "This can't just be brushed under the rug." Arthur nodded and responded, "It won't be." Arthur retrieved his phone and dialed a number. Harper stiffened as he listened to the brief conversation. "This is Arthur Bradley," he said. "I need an internal affairs team dispatched to Riverside Park immediately. There's been an incident involving an officer." Harper's face turned crimson. "Sir, please," he stammered with a cracking voice. I've got a family. This was a misunderstanding, I swear." Arthur gave him a long, hard look, then said to him, "Officer Harper, the law doesn't bend for convenience or circumstance. You should know that better than anyone." Within minutes, another police cruiser arrived, this time carrying 2 officers from the Internal Affairs Department. One of them, a woman named Detective Angela Pryor, stepped out, her notepad already in hand. She greeted Arthur with professional respect, her demeanor signaling she understood the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Attorney General, I'll take it from here," she said. Arthur nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you, Detective Pryor. Make sure the process is thorough." Pryor turned to Harper in a cold voice. "Officer Harper, you're relieved of duty pending an investigation. Hand over your badge and firearm." Harper hesitated but complied, his hands trembling as he unfastened his badge and handed it over along with his gun. Pryor signaled for another officer to escort him back to the station. As Harper was led away, the old woman let out a breath she'd been holding. "Thank goodness," she said. "I thought he was going to hurt someone." Arthur placed a reassuring hand on her arm and said to her, "Justice takes time, ma'am, but it always catches up." This brings us to the end of this story. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Kindly subscribe for more thrilling stories. Like and share this video. Have a nice day.